What would I have done differently for the Buffalo Bills in the 2022 NFL Draft? I'm answering that question and taking Bruce Nolan down with me today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino from the Draft Network, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. Happy Wednesday to you, and thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, or if you're joining us on the YouTube channel, your first watch every day. Well, this has become an annual tradition. For the third year in a row, myself and Bruce Nolan, we're going to go toe-to-toe with Bills general manager Brandon Beane and tell you what we would have done differently in the 2022 NFL Draft compared to what Brandon Beane put together a week or so ago. And so we'll work through all of our picks, compare them to Beane's picks, and then in the last segment, we'll reflect on the results from 2020 and 2021. Bruce, as always, thanks for joining me. And I say it every year, but this is kind of a challenging thing to do, to go toe-to-toe with the beloved big baller Beane. We're going to sit here and tell you what he should have done and, not make any excuses about it and have some fun here on the podcast. Bruce, thanks for joining me.
Oh, thanks for having me, Joe. I think that the thing that really speaks to me about this exercise is that you and I being willing to sit down and put our opinions in pen immediately after the draft allows us a level of intellectual honesty later on down the road where we can look back like we'll do later on this evening, and we'll sit down and we'll say, okay, what did we say about 2021? What did we say about 2020? And so the further you go along and the more times you do this, the better vibe you get. And you also allow yourself to remain intellectually honest because you can say, listen, here's what I thought at that time. We have receipts at this point from 2020 and 2021. So there is no backtracking. There is no going back and getting all the positives and leaving all the negatives and none of that stuff. So that's what's really appealing to me about this particular exercise.
I will acknowledge right off the bat that we do have the benefit of hindsight. We are allowed to pick players that were picked after the Bills selection, and Brandon Beane doesn't have that luxury. So I will go ahead and acknowledge that, but we'll also acknowledge that Brandon Beane has a more intimate knowledge of the players, obviously, and an intimate knowledge of his plans for the roster. And that will make sense in a couple minutes when I explain one of my selections. So stay tuned for that little piece of this conversation. Bruce, I'm also excited for this conversation today because I don't really know what you think of the Bills 2022 draft class. And this is going to give us, or give me at least, an idea of where you stand on these picks. I listened to the Bruce exclusive last week, and you did talk about the Bills draft class, but I got to be honest, man. As soon as you said Rocket Raccoon, I was Googling that guy, trying to figure out who that was, and I really have no idea what you said about any of these players. So you definitely covered that in a unique way, and this will be useful for me to get caught up to speed on how you felt the Bills did last week.
Yeah, the plan for this week on the Bruce exclusive is to do where I went right and where I went wrong on some of the mock draft stuff that I did. And that will kind of bleed into a little bit more. I figured by the time Thursday rolled around, everybody's heard what people think about the draft class in depth. Anyone who's followed me on social media knows that. And I said, you know what? Let's have a little fun with this. I got a listener email that said, hey, Bruce, what if the Bills draft picks were Marvel characters? I was like, you know what? Let's go. Let's do it. Why not?
And as somebody who's only seen the first Iron Man, that's it. That's the entire familiarity that I have with any of the Marvel movies. I was lost. But I listened. You could rest peacefully knowing that I did listen to the show, regardless of my lack of understanding of what you were talking about there at the end.
Well, I appreciate that. It's just, it speaks to the true Bruce exclusive fan that you are, that you stuck with me, even though you're like, I don't know who any of these people are. I think I understand the metaphors, but I don't understand who any of these people are.
Yeah. All right. Let's do it, Bruce. Let's work through these picks. Let's tell everybody what we would have done differently than Brandon Beane. And we'll start with pick 23 in the first round. Kairi Elim was Brandon Beane's pick, cornerback out of Florida. I'll go first, and then we'll alternate back and forth. My pick for the Bills at number 23 would have been Kairi Elim, cornerback from Florida. And I'm keeping it the same. And I know that a lot of you people right now are thinking to yourself, Joe, you released a Bills-specific big board. You told us to peel the names off in order, and the one that's highest remaining is the one the Bills should pick. And you're right. But this is what I was talking about earlier, where Brandon Beane has more information than we do. I am going to trust that because Brandon Beane did not pick a safety, that there's some level of belief and expectation that Jordan Poyer is going to be on this roster beyond this season. And that's why the highest player on that board was Daxton Hill remaining. And that's why I'm not going to pick Daxton Hill, because I'm going to have confidence that Jordan Poyer is going to stick around. The other player that was higher than Kairi Elim, who was 21st on my board, was Andrew Booth Jr., cornerback from Clemson. I'm going to trust that the Bills were not comfortable with the medical information as it relates to Andrew Booth. That would leave the highest remaining player, Kairi Elim. And because I believe very emphatically that the Bills needed to address the cornerback situation, I was always going to pick a cornerback for them. And I'm satisfied with Kairi Elim. I believe in his ball skills. I believe in his work ethic. I believe in his coverage instincts. I think he's a physical player in coverage, and I think that will translate to better run defense and tackling. And while he's not the most agile athlete, I do like the linear explosiveness that he brings to the table to carry routes vertically down the field better than guys like Dane Jackson or Levi Wallace can do. So I'm holding firm here and sticking with the pick, Kairi Elim at 23.
I as well am holding firm with Kairi Elim. And the discussion that I had about cornerback moving into the draft was I actually had Kyler Gordon ranked ahead of Kairi Elim. So you might be asking, Bruce, why not Kyler Gordon? Like, why? I don't understand. And the answer is, number one, they're in the same tier, so they're really close. And the second thing is that the system fit makes me not feel strongly enough to be willing to move off the pick. The way I approached this exercise was I had to have felt strongly about moving off the pick in order to do it. And in this case, I didn't feel strongly enough. In addition to this, I think that there's an argument that Kairi Elim is a better fit than Kyler Gordon in this system, because Kyler Gordon, I would argue some of the worst reps he had were in zone, where sometimes he would, understand that he's a really good athlete, but he just looks lost a couple times. And Kairi Elim, I think, has the length, has the intelligence to be able to be a really, really good zone corner. We've seen what intelligence can do in a corner with Tre'Davious White, who's one of the smartest corners in football. Kairi Elim is that kind of intelligent when it comes to football. And I think that you're kind of developing a type when it comes to corners for Brandon Beane in the first round, even though he didn't draft Tre'Davious White. But you're developing kind of a type. You get those really, really smart corners who have the requisite physical traits. Like you mentioned, the ability to carry long speed, I think, is really, really valuable, because what that does is it doesn't make you required to roll Micah Hyde over top of that the way you previously were when it comes to, Dane Jackson and Levi Wallace. You had to cap that corner. You had to, because the long speed was an issue. It wasn't necessarily the quick, shifty separation guys who were eating up that scenario, and it wasn't them who was putting the corner in danger. It was the deep speed. It was deep speed down the field that is what makes you need to cap that corner with a safety. And now you don't have to anymore. So given the fact that they're really close, given the fact that you have the intelligence and football character of Kairi Elim, given the fact that you make an argument he's a better fit in the system than Kyler Gordon, I don't feel strongly enough to move off Kairi Elim for this reason. I'm sticking with it.
Just to add another comment there on Kyler Gordon, I 100% agree with you that he would just not be a good scheme fit. And I call him a grass dropper in zone, where there's just not a whole lot of understanding of route combinations to work off of his landmarks and squeeze routes, right? He's just getting to his landmarks without regard for what's happening in front of him. If the Bills were a press man team, like the Miami Dolphins or what the Giants are going to be, Yeah, give me Kyler Gordon all day long, but they're not that team. Kairi Elim, to me, is the better fit, and I think the Bills made the right choice. We both believe they made the right choice there at 23. Now it's time for the second-round pick, number 63 overall. Brandon Beane picked James Cook, running back from Georgia. Bruce, it's your turn to lead off.
I took Jacoby Dean, linebacker, Georgia here. Number one, this is one of those things where this is not fair to Brandon Beane. This is fair to Bruce, but not to Brandon Beane, because I knew that he was going to be there at this spot because I have the benefit of hindsight. But if you were going to take a linebacker in this draft, taking a linebacker who potentially gives you the opportunity to be able to move on from Tremaine Edmunds is something that appeals to me. If you wanted to get a third linebacker, great. If you want to get a third linebacker who could potentially be a starting linebacker next year, then I really like Nakobe Dean, and I really like what's between his ears. That's the big thing for me when it comes to Nakobe Dean. I think he's a good processor. I think he triggers downhill well. I think that with the addition of Daquan Jones, I think there's a reasonable chance you could keep him reasonably clean, which was one of the big discussions coming out about Nakobe Dean. How's he going to act without Jordan Davis in front of him? Well, first off, he didn't have Jordan Davis in front of him for a large quantity of snaps, but also, Daquan Jones was brought in for this specific purpose. He's a two-gapping defensive tackle. One of the things that you and I talked about very early this offseason about where the defense can go if you make specific additions. So I think that there's a chance you might see still a good version of Nakobe Dean, being able to have a player who was downgraded for medical, not take a first-round risk on him, take a second-round risk on him, and also say, hey, now we have a backup plan. We have a contingency plan in the event that Tremaine Edmunds were to not be re-signed after this year. That's what I would go with. Nakobe Dean, linebacker, Georgia.
All right. I'm not going to hate that pick. He's a good football player. I had him graded much higher than he went. Obviously, the medicals played into that. And I like the opportunity to have a plan in place if you don't bring back Tremaine Edmunds. As for my selection, I'm going to do a very boring thing, and I'm going to keep James Cook, running back from Georgia. I think James Cook is everything that this backfield and this offense in a lot of ways needs. They need a pass-catching back. They need a guy that can offer speed to the perimeter. I'm of the belief that they're going to adapt more wide zone principles running the football, and I think James Cook really fits that. Now, I wish James Cook offered more as a between-the-tackles runner, but that's okay. I think you can supplement what's lacking there with players that are available in every single draft, like a Tyler Algier, for example, who went late in this draft out of BYU, or Kevin Harris. Those types of players are always going to be there for you. So I like what James Cook brings. I like what he could take off of Josh Allen. And if I didn't pick him, to me, there wasn't a fallback option that I loved as much as I liked James Cook in the second round to be that missing piece of this offense. So I'm holding firm with my first two picks, staying with what Brandon Beane did. Which brings us to the third round, where Brandon Beane picked Terrell Bernard, the linebacker from Baylor, pick 89 overall. To the surprise of nobody, I am not going to stay with the pick there. This was, to me, and I've received a lot of feedback, and maybe this is my fault because I pounded the table so hard for Dylan Parham, the interior offensive lineman for Memphis. People were DMing me right after the pick was made, like, Joe, can you believe they picked this linebacker when Parham was on the board? And I was telling people I'd have taken Parham in the top 50. And so, again, with the benefit of hindsight that we get being in this from this vantage point and knowing that I could get Parham in the third round, I'm pulling the trigger right there. He's a guy that I think gives you depth right now at both guard spots. And I think the Bills are decent with guard depth when you look at Greg Manns and Ike Bacher coming back. Cody Ford's in the mix. But I think Parham is a guy that gives you a succession plan for Roger Saffold, who I think is a one-year thing. I'm excited about him for 1 year, but I think he's a one-year thing. And I think the guard position under Brandon Beane has been something that's been very unstable year over year. I mean, it's been a revolving door at both guard spots. And so I want to have this solidified once and for all. And with Ryan Bates locked up for 4 years, now I have Saffold for 1 year and then Dylan Parham on a rookie deal for 3 more seasons after that. I feel good about the short term and long term of the guard position, which has been a problem in Buffalo ever since, the McBean era started. And I'm going to get that taken care of here with Dylan Parham at 89, which opens the opportunity for you to do something different here? Because I'm guessing you're not going to stick with a linebacker after going with a linebacker in the second round.
You are correct. Double dipping on linebacker on day 2, not a Bruce plan. But I am going to take the opportunity and take Rachaad White out of Arizona State. I'm going to do that here because, number one, I had White one spot ahead of James Cook in my running back rankings. I think he can still give you that outside zone presence. I think he can still give you the pass catching presence, not to the same degree that James Cook can. I mean, I don't think this is a player you're going to split out wide and ask him to run stop and go routes, right? I don't think that's a thing. But if you wanted to get someone who offered you more of a well-roundedness, I think if you wanted to get someone who could simultaneously help you in the passing game, but also, hedge against the departure of Devin Singletary, so that next year you're not forced to say, well, goodness gracious, we don't want James Cook to be the full-time 15 to 20 touch a game running back for this team. I need to go get a Tyler Algier, like you mentioned. I need to go get a Dameon Pierce, right? Yeah. I need to go get somebody late day 2, early day 3 again for the Buffalo Bills. So I think that when I look at, expenditures, I recognize that I am taking a little bit of hit in the receiving game, but I'm getting something that I think can be potentially an RB1 for this team moving forward, but can come in and help you right now in the passing game. I'm taking Rachaad White, Arizona State.
All right, I respect the pick. It's certainly a player that profiles better as a between the tackles runner. I think, again, the trade-off is the receiving skill. He's a good receiver. My trade-off with Cook was the between the tackles. So it's an interesting comparison of what we were doing with the running back, but we both agreed that running back was something that this team needed to address on day 2. Neither one of us is going to pound the table for that guy on day 1, but you and I have had a lot of conversations over the years about day 2 running backs, and I remember that J.K. Dobbins, Jonathan Taylor year. I mean, those were the guys we were pounding the table for. You wanted Taylor, if I'm not mistaken. I wanted Dobbins, so the Bills got Zach Moss, but that's a conversation for another day, maybe even later today as we reflect on that draft in just a little bit. Your turn to lead off here. The Bills in the 5th round picked Khalil Shakir, wide receiver, Boise State, number 148 overall. Your selection?
I am once again staying with Brandon Beane. We're going to do Khalil Shakir. I was a big Khalil Shakir fan before the draft. I think that there's an opportunity here to get multiple pieces. And if you look, a lot of the pieces that I got fill multiple roles. They fill multiple problems. They are solution to multiple problems. When you look at Nakobe Dean, right? If you want to go third linebacker, if you're playing, teams in our division who want to go a little bit heavier and you want to go base a little bit more, you can do that, but also can potentially take over for Edmonds. With Rachaad White, someone who can help you as a receiving running back, but also take over for Devin Singletary. With Khalil Shakir, last year was the year without Andre Roberts as a return man, and it was scary for me. I was not thrilled every time the Buffalo Bills had a scenario where they were returning a punt. I just kind of held my breath just a little bit, and I don't want to go back to that. And I think Khalil Shakir can help with that right away. I know he's not an extensive return man, but he profiles all the correct traits to be able to do that at a reasonable or better level. Plus, Jamison Crowder's on a 1-year deal. So if you want someone who, again, can come in right now and help you, and also profiles a slot receiver, and also profile as someone who you can give the McKenzie touches to. So now we're not only a solution to 2 problems, we're potentially opening up a solution to 3. If you want to move on from Isaiah McKenzie next year and you have Jamison Crowder on an expiring contract, you can get a 5th round pick and take care of 3, not 1, not 2, but 3 present or future issues. It's an absolute slam dunk for me. It's a home run. It's a grand slam. Use whatever type of other sports metaphor you'd like to use, but I'm sticking with Khalil Shakir, wide receiver, Boise State.
Well, after that monologue, it'd be awfully weird if I didn't also stick with Khalil Shakir, wide receiver, Boise State, but I have a feeling that you had a feeling that I was going to stick with Khalil Shakir, which is absolutely the case. He's a player that, honestly, if the Bills picked in the 3rd round, I would have been happy with the pick then. I mean, at 148, I think it's an absolute steal. Even if we were doing this experiment and the Bills picked Khalil Shakir in the 3rd round, I would have kept with it. I mean, you summed it up perfectly. I believe everything that you said, and I think he's going to be a really impactful player that the Bills somehow found in the 5th round, and people are going to be wondering for a long time, how did the NFL let the Bills get Khalil Shakir in the 5th round? My guest today is Bruce Nolan from the Bruce Exclusive Podcast. You can follow him on Twitter at Bruce Exclusive. Also, Food for Thought Friday nights live on the Buffalo Rumblings YouTube channel with Nate Geary. Bruce, what can everybody, or what should everybody know about your work, your social handles, and what's going on in your content creation plans over the next few months?
You should know that you're going to get some different stuff from me than you would historically get. As previously mentioned, my post-draft analysis was made up of two parts. The first part was discussing the merits of draft grades and what it is exactly that draft grades can provide to us, what we can learn from them, and why I think that they're misunderstood. And that's the reason why we rebel so significantly against them. The second half of that same podcast was me comparing Bill's draft picks to anthropomorphic and talking raccoons. So that's what you get with the Bruce Exclusive. It's a very serious and also not serious at all sort of show. And then Friday nights, I do a show with Nate Geary, Food for Thought, where we've been going for a year now, and we still haven't run out of food metaphors to make. The entire show is just being able to make as many food metaphors as humanly possible when it comes to football, because we all feel like that's something that so many people can relate around. I've managed to ingratiate myself into food Twitter, and I love food Twitter. Food Twitter is fantastic because we can all disagree on everything and no one yells at each other. Like, it doesn't matter what kind of food take I have. We're all just getting along. It's so much better than sports Twitter. So wow. I'm just trying to kind of bring some of that kindness and love into the football side of things. So you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Bruce Exclusive. And I'm just happy to be here.
Bruce, what pick did you compare this Rocket Raccoon to?
I think I compared Terrell Bernard to Rocket Raccoon. Yep.
Yeah, that's. And now I'm remembering the analysis.
Yeah. The analysis was, okay, so I'm a little confused. There's a talking raccoon. I don't know why he's here. He has a very large gun. He seems like a good athlete. That's fantastic. But really, you're going to use up a spot on the Guardians of the Galaxy with a talking raccoon with a large gun? Can't somebody else hold the big, large gun? I don't get it. Listen, there's nothing wrong with Rocket Raccoon. He's a perfectly reasonable character. But the first time you're introduced to Rocket Raccoon, you're like, okay. And he kind of has to grow on you. And he grows on you a little bit because of all his witty retorts and things like that. And before too long, you view him as like an integral part of the Guardians of the Galaxy. But the first time you're introduced, you're like, I don't quite get it at all. And that was my Terrell Bernard pick.
You know, I couldn't be more happy that I got that again, and it will live also on the Locked On Bills podcast. You know what I mean? Like, that's just a big win for me. I got to tell you, man, I'm not kidding. I was listening to you in the car. I parked. You started talking about the Rocket Raccoon. I had no idea who this was. I Googled it, and then I went in like a deep plunge. You know what I mean? On what this guy is, what he does. And I had no idea what you said the rest of the podcast.
So knowing that you just got introduced to Rocket Raccoon, how do you feel about the analysis? Do you feel like the analogy is good?
Yeah, it's phenomenal. It fits perfectly. And I hope that he winds up being exactly what you said. And Terrell Bernard winds up being an integral part of this defense, right? It's you know, why is he kind of small? He's got the gun, right? It's all there. I liked it. All right, let's keep this moving. We got 4 more picks to compete with Brandon Bean on. You went first on the last one, so it's my turn to lead off here. 6th round, the second consecutive year that Brandon Bean held 3 6th-round picks. So I don't know if that's a trend or what. He had 2 in 2020, so I think he likes something about the 6th round. Pick number 180, he picked the punt god Matt Araiza, San Diego State. And I'm going to do the same. I'm sticking with it. You know all about my frustrations with the punter situation for a while in Buffalo. And I think Araiza has a really good opportunity to solidify that long term. Obviously extremely gifted. Really only a 1-year punter at San Diego State. And for him to have the year that he did is really impressive. Now, obviously he has to prove better control. He has to show that he can hold. But this is a really talented punter that has a lot of room for upward mobility to get better. And I like pairing him with Tyler Bass as the core specialist for this team moving forward. So I like Araiza, and I'm sticking with him.
I'm also sticking with Araiza. And one of the reasons why I wasn't comfortable with a late day 2 pick on a punter, especially given the fact that it was Araiza, was because people don't realize he is a projection. This is not someone who walks in as someone you would believe to be an NFL-ready punter. However, Tyler Bass was a little bit of a projection too. And punters develop, kickers develop. I did an entire thing when Tyler Bass came out the gate, week 1, week 2 of his rookie season, and wasn't great. I had to do this whole thing about tracking punter development and kicker development and saying specialists actually do get better. And I pulled all these stats from Sebastian Janikowski to, Justin Tucker, to all these kickers who had long careers in the NFL, saying, okay, they do get better. And if you're going to take a swing, which is essentially what this is a swing on a starting punter, let's do it in the 6th round, because if you win and he develops, that's an absolutely good use of a 6th round pick. If you don't, it's a 6th round pick. It's fine. Yeah. But if it's a 3rd round pick, then you're passing on someone who you think can be a meaningful member of this team for 2 contracts for a project punter. So the range of upsides between the best possible case to the worst possible case changes a lot when you go from using a 6th round pick on a punter to using a 3rd round pick on a punter. So for me, I was all the way out on Matt Araiza in the 3rd round. I'm all the way in on Matt Araiza in the 6th round.
Bruce, I feel like I need to clarify something that I've said in the past, because when talking about Matt Araiza, I said on this podcast several times that I think if you want him, you have to pick him in the 3rd round. And obviously I was wrong about that. But the reason I was wrong about that, and I'm interested if you agree or not, and obviously if you disagree, let me know, is because this was a friggin' good punter class where Jordan Stout, Penn State, Jake Camadra from Georgia, Matt Araiza, the punter from NC State, Trenton Gill. We tied the record for punters drafted. And I think if it was only 1 or 2 of those guys, that teams would have felt the urgency to pick them a little bit earlier, as opposed to, well, there's 4 good punters this year, and Stonehouse out of Colorado State's another really good player. Like, there was just a really good crop of punters this year that people said, yeah, I don't have to go get them right now. I can wait because there's several that I like. And so I think that's where I was a little misguided in saying that pre-draft. Are you with me, or am I off base?
I said it too. So if we're going to go down, we'll go down together. I said that I thought Matt Araiza was going to be a late day 2 pick. And the reason I thought that is because we've seen that happen before.
Oh,
that's not uncommon to have the best punter in the class go in the late 3rd round. It's happened in the past. It's not like it's only happened one time, or there's some. We've seen kickers go on the late day 2 as well. We've seen kickers go in the 2nd round a couple times. And if you had a situation where I was probably a little bit more in tune with the other, like, I knew it was a good punter class. I knew it was a perfectly fine punter class. But if I was a little bit more in tune when I would have made that statement, I probably wouldn't have said that. But you live and learn. And in this case, like you said, the quality of the class caused the first punter be taken off the board, middle of day 2, the middle of day 3. And then you had a punter run. You had a run on punters. And I tweeted it out at the time, we're going to have a run on punters. And Matt Araiza ended up being taken.
All right. So I've held firm on 4 out of 5 picks, and you are firm on 3 out of 5. It's your turn to go first here. 6th round, 185. Christian Benford, corner out of Villanova, was the pick of Brandon Beane. Where are you going with this one?
I'm holding firm on 4, baby. I am holding firm with Christian Benford. I was happy about the Christian Benford pick. My watch board coming into the NFL draft is always like, okay, I'm going to watch 20 running backs, and I'll watch, 9 quarterbacks, and then I'll watch like 29 or 35 corners. Like that's always the way it goes. And I'll always watch way more corners than everybody else. And I have some family connections with Villanova. And so I was peripherally familiar with Christian Benford, and I had watched him against Penn State, and I was on board with Christian Benford. When we took him, I said, hey, you took a player who is diet Kairi Elim, right? There's a lot of physical traits, when it comes to the athleticism, the stiffness, the size. There's a lot of things that look like diet versions of your 1st round pick. Obviously, the quality of competition is a very significant one when it comes to him, but giving you position flex to potentially go to safety. I think that you have a player that I liked better than Dane Jackson. Like I liked Benford better than Dane Jackson, and I was completely happy with the Dane Jackson pick when it was made. I wasn't like over the moon, but I was like, yep, good, solid nod. And I felt more strongly about Benford than I did about Dane Jackson. So I'm sticking true, and I'm going with the 4th pick now that I've said, yes, I will take what Brandon Beane is serving. Christian Benford, corner, Villanova.
Well, I'll have what you're having. I'm sticking with Christian Benford as well. A fascinating pick, one that the more I've thought about it and the more I've learned about Christian Benford, I've really become very comfortable with him in the 6th round, and kind of looking at some of the things you discussed earlier with some of the picks and how they can help solve multiple problems on this team. I think the same can be true for Christian Benford, where, first of all, good size, really, really, really good tackler, good run defender, good ball skills, right? I think he had like nearly 48 pass breakups. He had 7 interceptions this year, like 5 in 2018. I mean, this guy's got a lot of ball production. So I love those qualities about him as a corner. But what I think he does for you is, at a minimum, I think he's going to be a plus special teams player that has a chance to take over for Taiwan Jones, who the Bills love as a gunner and a jammer on the punt team, and obviously covering kicks on the kickoff team and blocking on punt return. I think he could be a core 4 special teams player for you. I also think he gives you a chance to have a developmental player at safety, where if you look at Jordan Poyer, you look at Micah Hyde, elite players in this defense, both of them had a background as a cornerback before they made the switch to safety. I can see that happening for Benford. And I'm not sitting here telling you Benford's the next Poyer, but I think that there is a path for him to become a meaningful safety for this team if it doesn't work at corner, where he can provide immediate depth on the outside. So he helps in a lot of different ways. There's a lot of paths that I can see for him being a good player for this team. And at a bare minimum, I think he's going to be a standout on special teams. That could be a gunner and a jammer. So I love the pick. I'm sticking with it. Now, I'll go ahead and spoil the next 2 picks. I'm not sticking with these. So you guys, if you're sitting here annoyed with me for going 5 out of 6 the same with Bean, that won't be the way it goes the rest of the way. And it's my turn to lead off. The last 6th round pick that the Bills made, 209 overall. Brandon Bean selected Luke Tenuta, offensive tackle from Virginia Tech. I am not doing that. I am going to stick with an offensive tackle, but I'm going to get one with a whole lot more tools to offer as a developmental player. And I'm going to Kentucky, and I'm selecting Dare Rosenthal. And maybe your first thought was, well, Dare Rosenthal wasn't drafted. Well, Dare Rosenthal should have been drafted, and he's as physically gifted as any offensive tackle in this class. You heard that correctly. He is an unbelievable physical specimen in terms of size and athleticism, and he has good tape. He went to LSU. He dominated there. I was comfortable with what he did at Kentucky. Now, there's some off-the-field stuff going on with Rosenthal that obviously pushed him out of the draft. I'm not worried about the Bills picking a player at 209 overall and ruining the team culture, right? I'm not concerned about that being a possibility. I think it's the right spot for a player like Rosenthal to come in and mature and potentially maximize his physical gifts. And so I don't think Luke Tenuta is going to make this team. But I would be more willing to bank on Rosenthal developing on his elite physical talent and having a chance to be a meaningful player for the Bills than I would Tenuta. So I like the offensive tackle idea. I'm just going to go with a far more gifted player here in Dare Rosenthal.
I am going to stay on the offensive line, but a different offensive lineman. I'm taking Chris Paul, interior offensive line out of Tulsa. The failure to address interior offensive line with essentially anybody does make me a little bit worried because, as you mentioned, we have a starting guard that is on a 1-year deal and is 34 years old. So I'm going to take someone who profiles as a player who I think could sit and learn for a year and really be potential moving forward. I'm not saying, you don't take someone in the 7th round or the 6th round and go, yes, absolutely. You're throwing darts. And like you said, you have an extreme physical athlete and you're saying, you know what? We're not going to ruin the culture with 209. Let's go ahead and do it. So for me, it's Chris Paul. Requisite size, requisite length, requisite athleticism. This is someone who has impeccable football character. They would absolutely love him there in that locker room. I think that if you look at your starting guards right now, and you have good athletes as your starting guards right now, I think that you need to continue to have that if you want to use some of those wide zone runs that we just talked about when you talked about Cook and I talked about Rashad White. Both of us believe that the Bills intrinsically want to run more zone. They just haven't had the horses on the offensive line or, quite frankly, in the backfield to be able to do it. So you have to prioritize guards who can get out there and move and have the length to reach. So for me, Chris Paul, offensive guard, Tulsa, let's do it.
All right. You're up. Last pick, 7th round, 231. Balin Spector, linebacker out of Clemson, was Brandon Beane's pick. What would Bruce Nolan have done?
Verone McKinley III, safety, Oregon. Now, you might be saying, oh, Bruce, Verone McKinley wasn't drafted. First off, I'm at pick 231, okay? So lots of people weren't drafted. But I really wanted to come out of this draft with a safety. I think that the pick of Benford kind of helps a little bit there. As you mentioned, I think there's some position flexibility moving on. But I really liked McKinley. I think he was a draftable player. I absolutely believe he was a draftable player. I think he has the versatility to be able to do the things that you want him to do, whether that's in split safety, that's single high, down in the box. I think he can do those things. And when you're taking, throwing darts, I know that the Buffalo Bills staff likes Jaquan Johnson. I like Jaquan Johnson too. But as an athlete, it really, really, really concerns me. It continues to concern me that Jaquan Johnson is not someone I feel comfortable leaving in single high. In fact, there's a lot of scenarios where I don't really feel that super comfortable with him in split safety. I think he's a sub package defender and a special teamer, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But as you run into situations with Jordan Poyer and Micah Hyde getting older, I want to have more. I want to have potential options moving down the line, the same way that I did with Rachaad White taking over Devin Singletary, the same way that I did with Khalil Shakir taking over for Jamison Crowder, the same way that I did with Nakobe Dean taking over for Tremaine Edmonds. You have to start succession planning, and with Jordan Poyer, even though he may be re-signed and could be a Bill for another 3 years, I need to start succession planning, and Verone McKinley's that player.
All right. My pick for the Bills, the 7th round, 231, I'm not sticking with Balin Spector. I am going with Jessie Lucetta, the linebacker edge hybrid player out of Penn State. Lucetta's a player that I got a chance to be around quite a bit during the draft process, and obviously I studied him at Penn State. He's a guy that you just want on your football team. And he played some stack backer for Penn State. He played some true defensive end for Penn State. And yeah, he's a little bit raw at both, but my goodness, this guy is a physical dude, heavy hands, and he's just a really urgent and relentless football player. At a minimum, I think you have an elite special teamer. And if he reaches all of his potential, I think you have a Lorenzo Alexander caliber player as a hybrid edge defender for your defense. And so I thought he should have went 3 rounds sooner than he ultimately did. But in my world that I'm operating in here with all the benefits of hindsight, I'm picking him at 231. And I think I have a rosterable player that is going to just bring so much to the team. I love his story. Really bet on himself, moving from Canada to Pennsylvania, kind of with a foster family to go play football. And then for him to get to Penn State, had a lot of opportunity. And now in the NFL, I just love the way that this guy has got to where he is. And he's a guy that I'm not going to bet against and would love to have on my football team. So Jessie Lucetta, the linebacker from Penn State, is my pick at 231. So, Bruce, we've done it. We went head-to-head with Brandon Beane. My haul is Kairi, Elim, James Cook, Dylan Parham. I switched from Terrell Bernard. Kept Khalil Shakir, so 3 of the 4 the same. Actually, 4 of the 5 the same. 6 of the first. I'm not a math guy. 5 of the first 6 the same because I stuck with Ariza and Benford, and then I switched to Dari Rosenthal, offensive tackle, Kentucky, Jessie Lucetta, linebacker, Penn State, instead of Balin Spector. For you, Kairi Elim in the first round, Nakobe Dean, linebacker, Georgia, second round, third round, Rachaad White, running back, Arizona State. You kept firm with the next 3 picks in Shakir, Ariza, and Benford. Then your last 2 are different. You went Chris Paul, interior offensive lineman, Tulsa, Verone McKinley, safety from Oregon. As you just kind of look at what I did, what you did, any thoughts, any themes that you've seen develop, anything that you want to comment here before we reflect back on 20 and 2021?
I think both of us took into consideration success and planning. I think that was a big part of what we looked at. We didn't look at stuff just this year that this team needed. We looked at down the road. We looked at the tough decisions that inevitably come at this point in a team's life cycle. You've paid your quarterback. You're getting ready to suffer that cap hit. You extended a large contract for Stephon Diggs. You have started to crystallize the players that you believe are core, which means there's going to be people you have to let walk. And as that happens, you have to start succession planning in the draft. I think that was a big theme of both of our drafts, is being able to say, hey, there's scenarios here where we have a player who can come in and be valuable to this team now, but even more valuable potentially down the line, and can allow you not to get stuck in a situation where you have to pay somebody, because that's a bad spot to be in. In addition, if you let them go and you don't have an existing answer on your roster, now you're telegraphing a need. And that's something we talked about on the Bruce exclusive not too long ago, is if everybody in the world knows you have this need, you have this glaring hole, you don't have the money to spend it correctly and fill it correctly in free agency, and you don't have somebody on the roster, well, now you got to draft for it. Now you're drafting for need. You're forced into drafting for need because you didn't have the plans in place ahead of time. And so I think succession planning is a general rule that we both kind of followed when we were looking at this stuff.
What's interesting is I don't know that you could say the same for Brandon Beane. And, Brandon Beane's smart, planner, calculated person, has done a really good job assembling a Super Bowl caliber roster. But when you think about the big expiring contracts on this team, whether it's Roger Saffold, Dawson Knox, and O.J. Howard at tight end, you go to Tremaine Edmonds at linebacker, I don't think Terrell Bernard is the guy that's going to replace him. You look at Jordan Poyer at safety. Brandon Beane didn't do anything about those things. And so do you think that is just him feeling better about the opportunity to retain all those players? Or like what, how do you process that? How do you interpret that? Because unless I'm missing something, I don't think Brandon Beane was very forward thinking at all with his picks.
I think there's always this weird balance to strike between planning for the future and planning for now. One of the things that was really interesting when Brandon Beane took over and the Buffalo Bills made simultaneous trades to move Sammy Watkins and Ronald Darby, pick up Jordan Matthews, pick up EJ Gaines in the pick, and essentially use those players to essentially trade up is what he did. He said, well, we want to win now and we want to win later, right? So in his mind, you have to do both. And you could make an argument that he didn't do one of those things this year. But last year, if you look at the double up with Russo and Basham, the Russo and Basham picks were very, very much about the ability to let Jerry Hughes and Mario Addison walk. So it's almost he's striking these weird balance between, wait, I'm not going to do it all 1 year. I'm going to be a very succession level draft in 2021 with Brown taking over for Darrell Williams and Basham and Russo, because you have expiring contracts with Jerry Hughes and Mario Addison. And you have these scenarios with your first 3 picks. And then you go to 2022 and none of that is the case. You almost wonder if the pendulum is going to swing back and oscillate the other direction if it's an any other thing, because 2021 was a very much success in draft. So I know that he believes in it. He mentioned at the combine not too long ago that you can have that rookie a year ahead of time, and then maybe the rookie can start to learn from the vet, and eventually you can let the vet walk. He talked about that, and we talked about it when it came to Gabriel Davis, about that being the scenario with Gabriel Davis. And then this year it wasn't any of that stuff. So I don't think he lost it. I think he's trying to probably strike a balance between winning now and winning in the future, which is what he originally said when he took over the job. And we were all like, oh, okay, good luck with that. Good luck for serving 2 masters. But it almost like the last 2 years, he's serving 2 masters. That's essentially what he's trying to do.
Great perspective there. Let's take a quick moment here and reflect on what happened in 2020 and 2021 when we did this very thing. In 2020, Brandon Beane's draft haul was AJ Epinesa, Zach Moss, Gabriel Davis, Jake Fromm, Tyler Bass, Isaiah Hodgins, and Dane Jackson. I had it Christian Fulton, corner LSU, now with the Titans. Zach Moss, I kept the pick. Cam Clark, offensive lineman from UNC Charlotte, went to the Jets, and I think he's had to medically retire at this point. Donovan Peoples-Jones, wide receiver from Michigan, now in the Browns. I kept Tyler Bass, Georgia Southern kicker. In the 6th round, I had Raymond Calais, a speedy running back from Louisiana, and then John Garvin, a toolsy edge defender from Miami. You had it Christian Fulton. We both went Christian Fulton with that 2nd round pick. Kept Zach Moss, went corner Amik Robinson from Louisiana Tech, Bradley Anai, defensive end Utah. You had the Bills picking Braden Mann, punter Texas A&M. You kept the Isaiah Hodgins pick, and then Anthony Gordon, quarterback from Washington State. How are you feeling about your 2020 haul compared to what Brandon Beane was able to put together that year?
I feel okay. I feel all right. I think that if Gabriel Davis breaks out this year the way that a lot of us are thinking that he might break out this year, then I think Beane's got me, because he also got Tyler Bass in this. AJ Epinesa has been, I don't think it's crazy to say he's been a disappointment through 2 years.
Right.
I feel really good about Christian Fulton. I feel Bradley and I is a perfectly reasonable, rosterable player in the NFL. Isaiah Hodgins obviously fell behind. Braden Mann's a perfectly reasonable punter. We would not be drafting a punter at this point, probably, if we had taken Braden Mann at that point. Zach Moss has been a disappointment. So Amik Robertson has been, again, a perfectly rosterable player in the NFL. So for me, I think that if Gabriel Davis hits, Brandon Beane's got me, because he's got Tyler Bass, who's a good kicker, and he's got a stud at Gabriel Davis. So far, I have a good player, which would be Christian Fulton, a good player, not a stud, a good player. Disappointment in Zach Moss, rosterable players in Robertson and I, rosterable punter in Mann, and then so far swings and misses on Hodgins and Gordon. So I think he's got me because the upside's there. You know, Gabriel Davis, if he turns into a stud, anytime you can draft a stud in the 4th round, that's a W. So I feel okay about it. Relative to Bean, I'm probably losing.
Yeah, I think I'm losing to Bean in 2020 as well. The big argument that I think I can make to defend myself is that if Donovan Peoples-Jones, wide receiver Michigan, was on the Bills, maybe he is Gabriel Davis. But, you know, that's all speculation at this point. And like you said, if Gabriel Davis becomes what we saw towards the end of the season last year, you know, then Bean's going to have the championship here for sure. I like that I kept Tyler Bass. I feel good about that. You know, obviously Cam Clark not being in the league anymore doesn't help me at all. I think he was in line to become a good starter, but, you know, medical issues, he retired. And then I think I had some toolsy players that are worthwhile late. So I don't think I did a bad job. But again, it's the Gabriel Davis thing where that's going to be the trump card for Bean, you know, if that winds up hitting like it's trending towards. 2021. Brandon Bean picked Greg Rousseau, Carlos Basham, Spencer Brown, Tommy Doyle, Marquez Stevenson, DeMar Hamlin, Rashad Wildgoose, pour one out, and Jack Anderson, pour one out. I had it Tevin Jenkins, offensive tackle, Oklahoma State. He's in line to be the starting left tackle for the Bears this year. Elim McNeil, defensive tackle, NC State. He had a great rookie season for the Detroit Lions. Ifeatu Melifonwu, corner from Syracuse. Ade Ogundeji, defensive end, Notre Dame. I kept Marquez Stevenson. I kept DeMar Hamlin. And then in the 6th round, I picked Jonathan Cooper, defensive end from Ohio State, and Trill Williams, corner from Syracuse, who wound up, you know, being an undrafted free agent that was rostered by the Miami Dolphins for last year. So I like what I was able to do here. I obviously want to see Tevin Jenkins, you know, mature as a starter, but I think McNeil looks like a really outstanding player. Melifonwu looks like a starting caliber corner. I don't have Spencer Brown to show for it. I think Spencer Brown has an incredibly high ceiling, but I'm pretty comfortable with my haul. But you know, if Basham winds up hitting, if Brown reaches his ceiling, Rousseau continues his development, obviously as a 17-game starter last year, you know, Brandon Bean has a lot to show for himself as well. You had it really good with these first 2 picks. Asante Samuel, cornerback, Florida State. Creed Humphrey, center from Oklahoma. Janarius Robinson, defensive end, Florida State. You kept Tommy Doyle. Shi Smith, wide receiver, South Carolina. You kept DeMar Hamlin. And then you had Israel Mukuamu, corner from South Carolina. Shaka Toney, the defensive end from Penn State, as your last pick. So, Bruce, as you think back on what we've learned about the Bills rookies and, you know, the guys that you had picking in place, how do you feel?
I feel great about this. I feel really, really good. I think that opening with Asante Samuel and then going Creed Humphrey, you could make an argument as one of the best centers in the league right now. Mm-hmm. And I got him in the 2nd round last year. Thrilled that I was able to do that. Asante Samuel is a good corner. He came in right away and was a difference maker. The rest of them all, I don't know. We'll see. It's too early. Shaka Toney, we probably knew when I drafted Shaka Toney that he probably wasn't going to be a major difference maker. I think that Mukuamu probably has a scenario where if you look at the pick of Terrell Bernard as a big nickel player, you might not make that pick if you made Mukuamu the year before. So that kind of trickles in to this scenario. So in addition, I doubled up on safety, so you might have felt more comfortable with the Jordan Poyer situation. Tommy Doyle was a 6th offensive lineman this year. So we don't know if that's going to be a W or not. And if it's W for Bean, it's W for me because I carried over the pick. But anytime you open the draft with Asante Samuel and Creed Humphrey, I feel really, really good about my opportunity. We'll see how it develops. But right now, I'm feeling very, very good that there's a possibility I absolutely hit home runs with those first 2 picks.
It's a good point that you make there, because if things happen the way that we did them, then obviously other picks wouldn't have happened. It changes the entire makeup of the roster, right? So that's just a natural thing that happens here. And then the other thing that I want to mention is, look, if the Bills picked the players that we chose, then they would have went to Buffalo, and a great place for them to be the best version of themselves. So look, it's out of our hands. You know what I mean? Like, we didn't pick where these players went. We're just saying that if they went to the Bills, they would all be hits, and we therefore would be able to take victory laps right now. But it's out of our hands at this point.
So we're just consultants, right? If everything goes right, then it's on us, and if it goes wrong, then it was on you, man.
Yeah. We can control, Bruce. That's all we can do. So, all right. Well, the 2023 NFL Draft is scheduled for April 27th, 28th, and 29th. I can count on you sometime in early May for the 4th iteration of What Would Marino and Nolan Do?
I will be there with bells on.
I appreciate it, as always. I got a feeling we might talk a few times before now and then. Everybody, Bruce Nolan, follow me on Twitter at Bruce Exclusive. Listen to the Bruce Exclusive podcast on Thursdays. Food for Thoughts live on Friday nights, and then in your podcast feed on Saturday. A lot of great content coming from Bruce and the entire Buffalo Rumblings podcast and vidcast network. All right, folks, that's going to do it for us here today on the podcast. Tomorrow is Herd Mentality. Friday, we will break down the Bills' schedule. We'll get it all on Thursday night, and I'll give you everything you need to know about it on Friday. So don't miss anything. Make sure that you're subscribed. We'd love it if you took a second to rate, review, and share the podcast. Have a great rest of your day, and I look forward to catching up with you again tomorrow.